Welcome to the Falmouth Chamber of Commerce.
The Falmouth Chamber is dedicated to working on behalf of our members to make Falmouth a better place to live, work, and conduct business. We are committed to developing the economic, cultural, educational, and civic interests of our community and welcome the support from all organizations to achieve our combined goals. Whether you call Falmouth home, are a summer resident, or a visitor, we hope you take advantage of all that the Chamber has to offer.
Hi, welcome everybody to the Monday, December 3rd, 2018 Board of Selectmen's meeting. The first item will be a Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
No proclamations. Next item on the agenda will be recognition. Mr. Brown?
I just think we should take a moment to remember Joe Quintiliani. He was a longtime veteran and a longtime member of the Veterans Council, and he did a lot of good work for a lot of people in town, and I didn't know the man very well, but the few times I did talk to him, I was pretty impressed with him. He was a good guy. I remember when we had our last Selectmen's listening session, he came there and he challenged us to get more involved and do more for veterans and be more proactive.
He started the coffee hours.
Yeah.
So I think he had, I know he had decades and decades of experience in the Coast Guard, and then also, really as a member of this community, his contributions to the scouting community were very significant. So he
Right.
continued that service even after he had left the military. So.
He was a great resource for me as a active scouter while I was, and so, yes, he was well-known within the scouting community for the entire time that I've been involved in it, so he'll
A
be
moment
missed.
of silence for missing Joe. Thank you. Sorry, you paused.
No, that's right. But I think we should take a moment and remember ex-President George H.W. Bush as well. Very
Absolutely.
respected leader in our country, who passed away Friday.
Moment of silence for President Bush. Thank you. Announcements, folks?
No, I don't think.
Julian?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple comments about a couple questions that have arisen on ceremonial American flag protocol. I'm happy to clarify that. We had a question arose over the weekend, as Selectman Patterson noted. Former President George H.W. Bush passed away, and the word came down, the notification out after the closure of Town Hall on Friday. And normally, if the word comes out, our Veterans Agent very ably steps up, which we greatly appreciate, and places a Town Hall flag at half-mast. This coming out over the weekend was just a mistaken oversight, which we regret, and but not any indication, nor should it be taken as such, of a lack of respect. The Town Hall flag was certainly placed at half-mast first thing this morning. I also wanted to share some information on the American flag protocol that we have here, and to the best of my knowledge at other municipalities in the Commonwealth, because there's some misunderstanding about that. So this is also on the town's website, has been for some time. The Governor's Office and the Office of the U.S. President control the determination of when the town's American flag is to be flown at half-mast in honor of a specific person or incident. The town of Falmouth receives such a directive from a representative of the Commonwealth or Washington, D.C. The public should be aware that this important ceremonial directive specifically applies to the single official U.S. flag that flies in front of Falmouth Town Hall. It does not apply to all other flags at the multiple public buildings and public locations within the town of Falmouth, including school buildings. So each municipal building in the Commonwealth, in our case, obviously, Falmouth Town Hall, is the official site to which protocol applies and to which we officially raise and lower the flag. On a few, thankfully, rare occasions, we've had a problem with the raising and lowering because the significant mast we have in front of Falmouth Town Hall here is automated, and we've had a few problems which have since been corrected that prevented the a single individual from operating the mechanism, which has required us then to bring in a cherry picker truck and try and place the flag at half-mast in that way. So a couple of times that has occurred, and we have corrected that in each case. And again, this past weekend was just an anomaly, and we are pleased that our flag is now at half-mast in respect for our former President Bush. Thank you for the opportunity to clarify that, Madam Chair. And as I noted, this is on the town website for anyone that may have a question about the American flag protocol.
Thank you. Any other announcements?
Maybe Mr. Johnson's top, could we just re-announce the posting for the Citizens Committee for the Route 20 expansion? Because I know we have the issue both on that application and for the request for consideration for waiver of the conflict of interest.
Sure. So anyone interested in volunteering for the Route 28 Citizens Advisory Committee, we would encourage you to go to the website and you can do a search on Citizens Advisory Committee. It should pop right up. You can also browse to it on the committee page. And what we will be looking for, we have a specific application form for this committee because of some of the unique issues that abutter conflict of interest issues present. So we've modified the format to elicit the necessary information and disclosure forms so that folks can be considered for participation in that. And the date for submission, I believe, is December 5th. So just got a couple days left to submit for that.
But it doesn't take long to fill it out, so if folks haven't done it yet, it's still plenty of time if they get the form tomorrow to get it
Yes,
done.
and those forms can be, the forms are obviously available by download from the website. You can also get a hard copy from the town manager's office if you prefer, and they can be submitted, again, hard copy or via email.
And Madam Chair, just to
Sure.
supplement,
Please.
members of the board will be conducting interviews as a matter of the routine for the decisions to be made on selecting the persons that will be serving on this committee. Those interviews will be 1 week from tonight, and then the selectmen, if they so determine, will make those decisions at your last meeting in December, which will be Monday, December 17th.
Great. Next item on the agenda is public comment. It's an opportunity for anyone here to speak on a matter that's not set forth on the agenda. It's a 2-minute timing, and basically to the, Mark, come on up. We'll get right to it.
Mark Finneran, Precinct 6. I just wanted to comment. Last month after the precinct meeting, Dan Shearer gave me a tour of the new West Falmouth Library, or the new old West Falmouth Library. And it's really a fantastic job that all those people did, and the list of, participants, donors and such is a mile long, but they raised about $3 million, and they did an absolutely fantastic job. And I think that anybody who hasn't been there yet really should stop by and look at it. Charlie's here; he pretty much ran the helm, but I mean there was numerous people, and there's a plaque in there with names, and but I was blown away. It's just a fantastic job they did, and they should be thanked and congratulated.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Hard work will deserve praise. Any other public comments? Okay, the next item on the agenda is to vote to affirm the appointment of the new zoning administrator. Mr. Suso.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As the board is aware, the town conducted an extensive search process for the important position of zoning administrator in the town, and I have provided some information to the board on my appointment to this position. I'm pleased to announce my intention to appoint Noreen Stockman to the position of zoning administrator, and I know that the board has received some background information on Noreen. She comes to us with a wealth of experience in similar positions in other communities in the Commonwealth, and is in a position to bring her experience to bear and hit the ground running in terms of the important mission and responsibilities in the zoning area. And I know that Noreen is able to be with us here tonight, and she may have some comments to make, but I would like to have the opportunity to introduce her to the board as well, and I would respectfully ask your consideration of affirming that appointment. I also want to acknowledge our past zoning board administrator, Sari Boudreau, is here with us, and Sari assisted us in this extensive search process for her successor, and we're very gratified that Sari has agreed to stay on an as-needed basis to assist in the transition, which is so important to us, and working with the Zoning Board of Appeals. Several members that we have here this evening as well, including Chairman T.J. Hurry, who joined us for the final interview as well. And we appreciate the extraordinary efforts and support of all in securing a well-qualified successor to Sari Boudreau for this important position.
Absolutely. Welcome. Please step up.
So I would, as she's coming up, I would move to affirm this appointment, partly in recognition because of her vast experience in zoning issues, but specifically with the amount of work she's had in housing, affordable housing, in her previous job. I think she'll be a great addition, so I'll make that a motion.
Second?
Great.
Thank you. Madam Chair, could I just interject?
Yep.
I'll also be asking, and I thank Selectman for his motion, if the board would waive the residency requirement, which is a formal protocol that I need to request as well. I would like to do so, if I may.
Appreciate that. Welcome. Please let us know what made you interested in this position.
Good evening, Madam
evening.
Chair, Board of Selectmen. I appreciate the opportunity to join your fine community. I have been working in zoning for some 17 years now in 2 different communities and was looking for an opportunity to start in a new community. And it happened that your position was available. So I'm looking forward to the opportunity to hopefully continue where your long-serving zoning administrator has been here. So I'm hoping that I can create a smooth transition from her position and perhaps bring some new ideas if you are open to such. And I appreciate the opportunity.
That would be terrific. You're from Ashland, I understand?
I currently reside in Ashland,
I've done that commute.
but I'm considering making a change, so.
Interesting.
Yes.
I commuted from Ashland for 2 years to the Cape. It's quite a feat.
Yes.
Any other questions from members of the board? Doug?
Interesting coincidence, we've been looking at some of the work that Ashland has done as far as like welcome to the community for new people in the government. So it seems like a pretty well-run town from what I can see from online. Do you have really, I know you had a very wide-ranging interests and a lot of different things that you've worked on. Have you actually had to do the work of crafting the decisions?
Yes.
Okay.
I've been responsible for a full, essentially ready-to-publish draft decision since joining Weston.
Okay. All right, good.
Important. Any other questions? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Welcome.
Congratulations. Happy to have you.
Welcome,
Need a
Noreen.
second?
And I would also move that we waive the residency requirement for this appointment. But encourage the applicant Noreen to certainly consider moving to Falmouth as quickly as possible, because the commute can be an exhausting one.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Great. For the next item, I'll be recusing myself and just move over from Megan English Braga to take the next item on the agenda.
Great, thank you.
I would move approval of the application for the second-hand dealer's license for Village Lamp Repair Shop.
And just for disclosure, I have worked with Mr. Rogers in the past. I don't have any interest or knowledge about this particular location, so I don't think that would affect my ability to vote on this.
Second?
Any discussion? Did you want to just let folks know what you're going to be continuing to do there or doing there?
Good evening.
Come right on up to the microphone just so folks can hear you.
Good evening. Yes, it's just going to open a small shop that would be primarily lamp repair, lampshade, selling lampshades, and I was looking to sell some refurbished lamps as well, which I think this license
Allows you to do.
allows me to do, yeah.
And just for folks, so I know there, a lot of people were concerned when the old Europa building was sold that the lamp business was, and so this is in that same space,
lot
so
of-
it'll be
lot of-
continuing that work.
Many tears shed, I heard.
Anyone want to give your name again, just so
My name is David Rogers.
more for the listening audience than anything?
Sure, yep, sorry.
Any
And
other
for your
questions?
future customers.
Yeah, exactly,
Future
more
customers
importantly.
with
Little advertising.
broken lamps, yeah.
So any other questions? Okay. I have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye. Good luck.
Great.
Thanks,
Thank
thank you.
You can come back.
The next item on the agenda is an application for change of manager of a wine and malt package store license for Windfall Market at 77 Scranton Ave.
I
Is
move
the
appro-
applicant here, by the way? Do you want to step up, sir? Sorry, I was a little slow on that.
Just right up to the microphone.
And just introduce yourself if you would.
My name is Sean Greenwood. I am the store manager of Windfall Market.
Welcome. Mr. Jones?
I would move approval of this application for change of manager.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Nice to put a face to a name, and we'll see you in the store.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Next, we have an application for change of manager for an all-alcohol club license for Ambets at 336 Palmer Avenue. Is the applicant here? Welcome, sir. Step right up.
Hello, ma'am.
Hi, could you introduce yourself for the audience?
Sure, my name is Jeffrey Bader.
All right, now we have lots of questions for you. No, I'm just kidding.
We've gone through this with a fine-tooth comb here.
I would move approval of the change of manager for the Ambets all alcohol club license.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Next, we have approval and execution of conservation restriction for Farley Bog and execution of deed transferring title to Falmouth Rod and Gun Club. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. We have about a 5-minute slideshow. Would you like to see that?
We would.
Okay. All right. All right, so for the record, my name is Laura Moynihan. I'm a Falmouth attorney, and I represent the Falmouth Rod and Gun Club. And with me tonight here is Mr. Tim Lynch, who's the president of the gun club, and Gary Anderson, who's the treasurer. So this is a conservation restriction. You may recall that the town meeting voted to authorize transfer of the land known as the Farley Bog to the Falmouth Rod and Gun Club, subject to imposition of a permanent conservation restriction, which is a condition of the transfer agreement. We have a date of December 20th set up in the agreement to affect the conveyance of the land. After the land is conveyed to the gun club and the conservation restriction is recorded, then the Rod and Gun Club will start the process of their extensive permitting for essentially restoration of this parcel. So what we have here to show you tonight is just a brief overview of what's going on with the parcel and some of the elements of the conservation restriction. So here we have just the GIS map showing in yellow, outlined in the middle, is the actual bog and a portion of the river. And you'll see it's right on the Mashpee town line. We have, it's off of Carriage Shop Road, just to sort of acquaint you with the area. This is a map showing the Farley Bog in the middle. The Garner Bog to the north is actually located in the town of Mashpee. Part of the restoration project will involve land within the town of Mashpee as well, which the Rod and Gun Club is negotiating a long-term lease. And then we have the dam to the south. And so as part of this project, there will be a restoration of 2 abandoned cranberry bogs, about 13 or more acres of that. Obviously, it's a primary area for wetland habitat, waterfowl, and wildlife. There will be rehabilitation of the Upper Childs River. So it's about 1.5 miles of river will be rehabilitated. And the goal in that is to create a cold water fishery in the river to foster the return of the sea-run brook trout, the American eel, and other native fish. Restoration and improvement of the wetlands will be part of this project as well. That will go to improvement of the water quality system and create water storage areas for flood control and sea level rise. So some of the key project components are removal of the dam and installation of flow control devices in the river, and removal of sand from the bogs and planting of native vegetation. Obviously, it's a $2 million project, so there's a lot more to it than that, but those are some of the key elements to it. And the Rod and Gun Club is looking at an estimated completion date of the fall of 2020. They've raised close to $800,000 now in funding. And are continuously looking for donations and fundraising and grants, and that'll be part of the process through this winter as well. The engineering alone to even get to the permit application stage is approximately $300,000, so it's a very significant project. So where we are now is that the Massachusetts Legislature and Senate, thanks to Representative David Vieira, have approved the Article 97 land transfer, so that's been adopted at that level. The Fisheries and Wildlife have reviewed the project and support it. Ecological Restoration has reviewed and supported the project, and the engineering is at the 60% design phase. This parcel, the Farley Bog parcel, is essentially surrounded by other land that is now subject to conservation restrictions, which is an added benefit to sort of complete the loop here. So the Falmouth Rod and Gun Club currently owns 100 acres off Carriage Shop Road, which is highlighted in the yellow, and that is subject to permanent conservation restrictions now. And then in the town of Mashpee, there's about 64 acres off of Milford Road, which is also owned by the club, which is highlighted with the two blue markers. Those two parcels are in permanent conservation. So this is the parcel in question. It has been surveyed by BSS Design, and it's 13.04 acres. The entire parcel will be subject to the conservation restriction. It contains the bog, contains wetland areas, the river area, and then there's a small portion of what is known as Milford Road on the east side, I guess you can see there on the map. So the benefits, I think, of this type of project are obvious, but for the purposes of approval and acceptance of the restriction, we highlight them: protection of the scenic and natural character, flood control, protection and enhancement of fisheries and wildlife, protection of the Childs River corridor, maintenance of water quality, protection of open space, protection of wildlife habitat, and recreational opportunities for the public. This particular conservation restriction does provide for public access to the parcel. So the timetable is for the conservation restriction is approval by the Conservation Commission, which occurred last week. The commission voted unanimously to accept and adopt the restriction. This board next, and if this board approves the restriction, it will be sent back to Boston. It's already been reviewed by the Division of Conservation Services, their staff, and their legal counsel, and approved, given preliminary approval to submit to you. And so then it would be signed by the Secretary of Environmental Affairs, and it would come back to myself and Pat Harris, and we would effect the land transfer from the town and record the deed and the conservation restriction at the same time. So we're hoping to have that done by year end. So that's where we are. I think that's the last slide. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have about the restriction. Tonight we would be looking for a vote from you to accept the conservation restriction on behalf of the town of Falmouth and to authorize execution of the deed to transfer the land to the Falmouth Rod and Gun Club.
I just have to say, starting with some volunteers' interest and looping in Rep. Vieira and then intermunicipal agreements with the town of Mashpee. I've just been to a couple of meetings where Gary has pulled a number of people together, and this kind of project has such kind of an effect into the future. I mean, it's a real legacy project that benefits the entire town, and it just takes some individuals, the Rod and Gun Club, and just putting the environmental improvements, and it just really amazes me. Continuously in Falmouth, you have people just get an idea, work on it, do the research, kind of get more people interested, and here it is happening. So, I mean, I just think this is incredible. Any other questions or comments from board members? Megan?
I was just going to say, along those lines, I think it, always causes pause when you think about how much these projects cost. I mean, just, to restore what was done to not just this section, but the other part of the Coonamessett, water system that the town is working on. I mean, it's unbelievable, the resources, both in time and financial, that go into this. And I hope that we, take stock of thinking of what we're doing coming down the road and making sure we're not then undoing it 20, 30 years later at the tune of millions of dollars. But it is wonderful to see that these projects can take place at the initiative of, it doesn't have to be a municipality, but individuals and an organization. So thank you for putting that project together. I think it's going to be just to the benefit of both communities, Mashpee and Falmouth.
I'd like to give a shout out to the Trout Unlimited. It's been kind of spearheading this. The Quashnet River, I just recently did a little hike and walked up that valley and saw all of the abandoned cranberry bogs, and the Trouts Unlimited has been basically steadily on their own initiative with, I think, very little grant money, been removing the obstructions and turning it into a natural river as well. So you're right, we have just great community organizations and commitment and long-range thinking and the willingness to get out there and invest time and resources to make these things happen. We are very fortunate.
Great gift if anyone wants to make a donation for holidays for a family member who loves to fish or loves nature. I'm sure that they're not going to turn down your donation.
Gary Anderson is the treasurer,
Yeah.
just again, for the record. Yeah.
Do you have a motion in that regard? Or Doug, did you
I'm
wanna
interested to know how the Mashpee side of it is playing out. Good.
Do you want to speak to that, Gary? Yeah.
Good evening, I'm Gary Anderson for Precinct 7. I'm also the treasurer of the Falmouth Rod and Gun Club and treasurer of the 501c3 charitable foundation, Sporting Safety, Conservation, and Education Fund. With respect to the Mashpee portion of the project, we have, about a month ago, signed a 30-year lease with the town of Mashpee, so we have effective control over the 24.7 acres. They are involved, they being the town, are involved, the Conservation Commission are involved with us on this project. They have approved it. We have been in front of the Board of Selectmen, the Conservation Commission, and we recently went in front of the Mashpee Community Preservation Committee to apply for $240,000 to help renovate and rehabilitate the Garner Bogs. And that portion of the Childs River that flows from the northern tip of, I guess it's from the Garner Bogs through the northern tip of the Farley Bog as the river flows south, not north. Right. So yes, we're making good progress there, and we have their complete support.
And will there be a conservation restriction on that area as well?
The land is and will continue to be owned by the town of Mashpee, and whether they have a conservation restriction on it, I don't know, but they do have, in the agreement that we have, there are all sorts of, there are prohibited things that not unlike the conservation restriction, things that cannot be done, there can't be any building on it. We are required to maintain the roads, has to have access by the public. very similar to what the conservation restriction is in front of you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
May I make a couple more? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr.
Oh,
Suso.
I don't mean to interrupt. I can hold off, Madam Chair.
Sure, go ahead.
Well, I would just like to take the opportunity, there's a ton of people that I would like to thank, and I'm afraid I'm going to leave somebody out. But first and foremost, I'd like to thank the board for all of your support and your generosity and help on this. Mr. Suso, I've been working with Mr. Suso on this, believe it or not, since about April, May of 2014. I had my first meeting with him. I also have worked a great deal with the Conservation Commission, the Falmouth Conservation Commission. Jen McKay has been very helpful. Betsy Gladfelter, who's been working on the Coonamessett, has been incredibly helpful also. The Town Council Office, Assistant Town Council Pat Harris has been very, very helpful and has worked quite a little bit with our attorney. Representative Vieira, Representative Fernandez, and Senator DiMacedo have all been very helpful in getting it through the House and Senate, the bill to transfer that. I might also note that they have been instrumental in getting and this is probably a dirty word, but it's an earmark into the environmental bond bill for not less than $1 million for this. Now, my next task is to work with Representative Vieira and get it into the capital plan so that we can maybe get some of those funds. The Falmouth Community Preservation Committee, we received a $150,000 grant from them. Once we get the conservation restriction filed and we get the title to the property, we can then access that money. So my fingerprints are in the dais here. Hoping we can get that done. I'd also like to express my gratitude to the DPW department, Ray Jack, Peter McConerty, and Jim McLaughlin. We've been working very closely with them, replacing the culvert under Carriage Shop Road, which is failing. And we think we've got some financing to help the town out there from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Department and the U.S. Highway Administration. So we will be pursuing that a little bit more vigorously. There's also a lot of citizens that have been very helpful, a lot of organizations in the town and outside the town. Really would like to thank everybody's amazing support, but also the generosity of the town in transferring the land. The only condition of the purchase and sale agreement is that we complete the conservation project, and we are well on our way. It was said that we've arranged about $800,000. I did the math again, and I like finances, so we have committed, when I say we have about $1.1 million committed to this project, and we're working diligently on more. So thank you again. We really appreciate your support and your generosity.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Mr. Suso.
Well, thanks, Madam Chair. I was just going to essentially echo Gary Anderson's comments. Yeah, remarkably, it was about a little over 4 years ago now that he came by my office and shared this incredible vision of what's been talked about in the years since, and it's just incredible and exciting to see it come to this point. And my compliments to Gary, Tim, and all others involved in the Rod and Gun Club for doing all the heavy lifting to bring this vision into reality. Granted, there's a couple years of important work left, but as I recall Gary saying when we first met a little over 4 years ago, there are a whole number of steps that need to be accomplished before he can even get to this point. And to show the energy and the leadership to rally all these good people in the community to support this wonderful cause says everything about Gary, Tim, and the Rod and Gun Club. And I'm just thrilled to have played a very small role in assisting this to happen. So thank you for the wonderful stewardship and really the love for the Falmouth community that this really represents.
Well,
my compliments.
Thank you very much. And on behalf of the Rod and Gun Club, we also thank the town. This is a great public-private partnership that it's going to be good for the town and good for the people. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Did we vote?
No,
Please, Sam.
I move we accept the conservation restriction and execute the transfer of ownership of the land.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Great.
Very good.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. May I leave these with you, Mr. Suso?
Certainly.
Please.
Thank you.
That's great, thank you, Laura.
They have little arrows on for the signature.
Sign here, sign here.
Thank you.
I've
We're
been
going
at
to go
this a
to
while.
the 7:30 wetland hearing, the 300 Committee, construction of elevated boardwalk, walking trails, bog bridges, and informational kiosks to improve public access to Two Ponds Conservation Area body of water affected as Jones Pond and Cedar Swamp.
But I think they're
They've asked
holding
for
on.
it. It's been delayed.
They've asked to reschedule.
Thank you, that is delayed.
She knew that. I encouraged her to go forward with that hearing. It's my fault.
Next, we have we'll go back to,
This is, the next hearing's also been asked to, has been withdrawn.
It's withdrawn.
great. Okay, so we'll go to designate members of the Shellfish Advisory Committee as special municipal employees for the purposes of the Conflict of Interest Law. Mr. Suso, do you want to tee this up?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. We have received a recommendation from Town Council regarding the recently appointed Shellfish Advisory Committee. The boards will recall the process of application and an interview that you recently conducted to make those appointments. Town Council has affirmed that from the standpoint of appropriate compliance with the Conflict of Interest Law, that he recommends that all of these members be designated as special municipal employees, and I so recommend to the board.
I would move that we appoint all the members of the Shellfish Advisory Committee as special municipal employees.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have on the agenda approval of restrictive covenant for sewer betterment at 197 Grand Avenue. Mr. Suso?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know if we have a representative here or not. This came from Town Council's office and is a recommendation for approval of a restrictive covenant, and I so recommend to the board for your consideration.
This is actually something we saw before. That was, the request had been made about 3 months ago when they were asking for the change from being one betterment or two betterments to a single betterment.
And
I
the
think this just protects us in the future, that it will stay as one betterment forever.
And the applicant did attend and explained the situation at that time.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So I would move approval of the restrictive covenant.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Next, we have signed certification of votes for civil officers in the November 6, 2018 election.
Megan need to do this one.
Oh, yeah, let's do it safely.
Is this it? No, just this.
That's it.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. And, so do I just read them out?
I think so.
Yes. Okay. Okay.
Please.
At a legal meeting of the inhabitants of the town of Falmouth in the county of Barnstable, qualified to vote for civil officers, holden on the Tuesday next after the first Monday in November, being the 6th day of said month in the year of 2018, for the purpose of giving in their votes for Assembly of Delegates for the county of Barnstable, all the ballots given in therefore were sorted, counted, and recorded, and declaration thereof made as by law is directed, and were for the following persons, namely Susan Lynn Moran, address, like 13,143, that's, they don't have your address, it's the number of votes.
Underneath it.
Underneath.
Oh, 74 Sandollar, Circle, Falmouth, number of votes, 13,143, number of write-ins, 92, blanks, 4,411, total votes, 17,646.
13,000, that's a lot of votes.
I guess that's a motion. I'll second.
Thank you, I'll say.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Next, at a legal meeting of the inhabitants of the town of Falmouth in the county of Barnstable, qualified to vote for civil officers, holden on the Tuesday next after the first Monday in November, being the 6th day of said month in the year 2018, for the purpose of giving in their votes for Register of Deeds for the county of Barnstable. All the ballots given in therefore were sorted, counted, and recorded, and declaration thereof made, as by law is directed, and were for the following persons, namely John F. Mead of 153 Elliott Road, Barnstable. Number of votes, 11,920. Number of write-ins, 181. Number of blanks, 5,546, for a total votes of 17,646.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Last one. At a legal meeting, the inhabitants of the town of Falmouth and the county of Barnstable qualified to vote for civil officers holding on the Tuesday next after the first Monday in November, being the 6th day of said month in the year 2018, for the purpose of giving in their votes for county commissioner for the county of Barnstable. All the ballots given in therefore were sorted, counted, and recorded, and declaration thereof made as directed, as by law is directed, and were for the following persons, namely Leo Kukunis of 1601 Factory Road, Harwich, 7,403, and Ronald Bergstrom of 1347 Old Queen Anne Road, Chatham, 8,860. Number of write-ins, 12. Number of blanks, 1,371, for a total vote count of 17,646.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
I don't think you can. Yeah.
Next item on the agenda is a presentation of proposed change in shellfish regulations. Chuck Martinson, Marine and Environmental Services. Welcome, Mr. Martinson.
Hi, thank you so much. Chuck Martinson, Shellfish Constable, and Deputy Director of Marine Environment. I sent a memo over to the board, which I'm hoping was in your packets. The reason I'm before you this evening is to possibly propose and possibly adopt an extension to a few different areas. The reason being, we have a significant amount of oysters remaining that we're worried essentially they'll perish if we don't have them harvested prior to the ice season. The two areas in question, the first one is area BB 54. It's a designation by the Division of Marine Fisheries. That's West Falmouth Harbor. The first part of it would be to allow recreational folks to be able to, in addition to shellfishing on the weekends for oysters, also be able to get them on Wednesdays and also be able to get double their limit for about a month. So essentially it would allow family people to get a half a bushel a week, no more than one peck a day, for about a month. And then after that time passes, we propose allowing the commercial fishermen to fish an area for 8 days, which is in the lower water area where we're going to likely have ice damage, remove the oysters from those areas in West Falmouth. Anything small, we're asking them to move into deeper water, to throw those animals out in deeper water so they survive, and then go ahead and harvest what's in closer. There'll still be ample stocks of oysters in those areas for family people. There's roughly, just in that family area, we brought about 30,000 or so pounds over just for the family area this past fall, so not worried about any shortage there. I don't know if anyone has any questions on the West Falmouth one first.
It seems to, I don't know that much about shellfishing, I never really do it, but it seems like a long time to give to the recreational fishermen and a short window for the commercial is...
Well, the difference is that the recreational people under these regulations could take a half a bushel and a week, and then under these same regulations, a commercial digger could take 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 16 bushels. So it's actually a lot less for the recreational take.
Yeah.
The reason we do that, though, is, I mean, the reality is what is someone going to do with a half a bushel of oysters? That's like 250 oysters.
It's a lot of shopping.
I guess
It's a long week. It's a long weekend.
I guess I'm just sympathetic to the commercial guys having to wait till it's really cold out there to get out and get their oysters. But
Right. Well, their oysters were in the commercial area, which we brought about 40 to 50,000 pounds of oysters over there. So this is
Okay.
the family area.
I see. So
So
they're
this
not,
started as a family area, and we're allowing the commercial fishermen into the family area. So this is started and it has been for decades, a recreational area.
I see.
And we're allowing the commercial fishermen to come into this recreational area.
Ah, okay, now I understand. Thank you.
And the new regulation's only adding 5 more Wednesdays. Right now, the families are still Right now, the families are still only able to go on the weekends.
Correct.
And we're just adding the Wednesdays from December 5th to January 2nd, so it's only 5 Wednesdays that they're getting added.
Okay, it makes much sense now. Thank you.
It's a really great management tool to come in here and really catch the wave in a timely fashion so these animals get used. And I was just curious if you've used in the past this sort of catch and throw where you ask the commercial fishermen they self-monitor, I would imagine?
We actually have the times and the tides set up so that it's it's a 3-hour period of time where we're allowing people to go down there. So it is somewhat self-monitored, but we anticipate having someone there most of the time, just to see that it's accomplished. And then any that are left over, we'll try to bring in volunteers to move those to the deeper water. It's really the first time we've kind of partnered up to be able to do this, and it benefits kind of all ends. I will likely be back here after the winter, possibly looking at additional openings, just because that stuff that's in the deeper water, we don't want that to sit for the whole summer, but I don't want to deplete the stocks more than, say, 10 or 15,000 pounds at this point for the recreational people. So
It's a cooperative effort. You're really enlisting, the commercial,
Sure.
assistance and to their benefit too. I think it's a
yeah, it's really worked out well this year. We track all of our volunteering hours, and we're coming up on about 3,300 hours of volunteering, which is everyone from just regular citizens to commercial fishermen to members from the Rod and Gun Club, you name it, AmeriCorps Cape Cod, Barnstable County House of Corrections. So it's I anticipate we'll be at about 3,500 hours, and that's free labor, and it's in a lot of cases skilled labor. So
It's a great atmosphere. I was mostly just observing, but still cold and lots of, just the energy that you instill in your leadership is so evident. Really appreciated. Sam?
Yeah, I wondered, Chuck, whether you might want to mention to the public that one of the things we want to make sure that this stock that would die because of the sick condition is actually removed, because there's a detrimental effect of leaving them in there and them die.
Sure, yeah. So we've got a tremendous monetary resource in there, just in the commercial aspect of it, and food resource. And absolutely, if they were left in there, the ice would essentially drop down on them if we had an icy winter, which we generally do about every other year, roughly. So yeah, it would absolutely be a damage to the natural resource.
Just because of the amount of decay that takes place, and it's just adding nitrogen to that particular
Well,
soil.
we want those animals taken out. That's poundage.
Right.
Absolutely.
That's what it comes down to. It's all a weight game.
Anyone ready to make a motion?
I would make a motion that we approve the change in shellfish regulations?
This is for West Falmouth Harbor?
Yes.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And next?
And then the second one is in Bourne's Pond. Similar situation, lot less shellfish. We would like to have a place over on the east side where folks could go ahead and harvest oysters. It's a limited area where we can seed over in some of those areas. We would like to propose having Saturdays and Sundays open in the family area just for the taking of oysters in Bourne's Pond, and then commencing on January 8th on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays for a brief time, allowing commercial fishing in that area to hopefully remove the rest of those animals. Similar concept, smaller amount of animals.
Move approval?
Second?
For Bourne Park. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. Next on the agenda is presentation of a vulnerability assessment by the Woods Hole Group. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Charles McCaffrey, Chair of the Coastal Resiliency Action Committee. I just wanted to take a moment to introduce Elise Leduc from the Woods Hole Group and the presentation of the important work they're doing. It's thanks to the foresight of the town that the town had the money available to do this study. $80,000 was appropriated last year by the town meeting at the instigation of Doug.
He's an instigator.
This work is critical to our fulfilling the charge that you gave us. A lot of the information that we get will be part of the overall report we give, and the data and what's in this is significant to enable us to prepare a comprehensive report for you. But even more important, right now, it'll begin to give us project ideas that we can seek funding for immediately or within the next several months. And the money is available, both town money and potential state money. So without saying any more, I'll let Woods Hole Group present their report. Or their initial, this is the first stage.
Initial findings?
Well, how they're approaching it.
Welcome, Elise.
Thank you. It's very,
Maybe while she's getting set up, I might mention Elise is actually the one that pretty much put together the multi-hazard mitigation study that was done on behalf of the town. So I thank you for all that prior effort that was put in.
thank you, Sam. My name is Elise Leduc, as Charlie said, and thank you very much for, making time in your schedule to hear what we have going on with this project. So this is the Climate Change Vulnerability Assessment and Adaptation Planning Project. What I'd hope to go through very quickly today, this is a very shortened presentation that the steering committee has already seen, but to go over the goals and objectives with you and sort of how we plan on going through the project methodology, let you know what the steering committee has decided so far that we're going to use as our sort of parameters moving forward, and then give you an overview of the schedule, so what you can expect to see when. The overall goals and objectives of this project are multi. So first and foremost, it is to provide data on likely future coastal flooding scenarios, and to identify potential flooding impacts to municipally owned infrastructure. So that part's important. There may be things in town that are critically important, the hospital, the steamship authority, but the town doesn't have the authority to decide what to do with those things. So this project is going to focus on town assets only, with the exception of roads. We are including all the roads that are within our model grid. This will also look at not just infrastructure, buildings, and man-made things, but sea level rise impacts to natural resources as well, beaches, marshes, coastlines. And we will use our results overlain with those assets to identify and prioritize potential adaptation strategies for the town to take moving forward. The project itself will produce a number of high-quality maps and graphics which the town can then use not only to help make decisions, but also to use as public outreach and education when communicating the findings to the public. And then how we're actually going to do this is in three basic parts. And really we're at part one right now. Determining the town assets, and really the legwork for a lot of the town staff is going to be coming up with the information to get us the critical elevations of those assets. Phase two is really taking those assets and our results and doing a vulnerability assessment, seeing how the flood risk and the assets overlay with each other, and then really prioritizing those based on risk and coming up with strategies and ways to communicate those strategies to the public. So step one, determining critical assets. This is where we've really focused our efforts so far. We did have a steering committee meeting on November 1st, and we had a follow-up presentation with the Coastal Resiliency Action Committee after that, so everybody's sort of on the same page. And what we've determined is that we will be using all of municipally owned assets within the model grid that are buildings, above-ground utilities like wastewater lift stations, roads and bridges. They chose also to include parking lots, boat ramps, recreational facilities, the Shining Sea bike path where it is in the low-lying areas, coastal infrastructure, as well as this was the one section of the sewer piping that we actually decided to keep in, because a lot of it's simply underground and would be kind of difficult to track, but this is a particularly vulnerable space, so we're going to keep the Trunk River sewer main as one of our assets as well. Now, when I say within the model grid, this is what I'm talking about. So I don't really have a button. But the purple line is pretty much the upland boundary of where our model is going to extend, and we just basically picked a cutoff of 8 meters elevation. It comes out to 26.2 feet in NAVD 88. That's basically well inland of anywhere we're expecting to flood, even during the biggest storm, even during the highest sea level rise scenario, even in 2100. So it's really the areas seaward of that purple line that we're talking about. So if you received, I don't know, did they get a copy of the memo yet? There's a long list of assets in the back of that. If you're asking yourself, why isn't X on the list? If it's somewhere else, if it's in East Falmouth somewhere, that's why. If it is somewhere in this purple shaded area, please tell me, and we'll make sure we add it to the list. Step 2 is really determining critical elevations. Now, this is where I'm going to need a lot of help from the steering committee and the town staff. Some of it we can do ourselves, looking at LiDAR if we're looking at ground elevations. But what is a critical elevation? And it could be a lot of things. It could be an opening to a basement on certain facilities. It could be outdoor equipment. It could be at the threshold to a floor or the first floor door. There could be equipment inside that maybe the floor of the building, while we don't like it to flood, nothing critical would get damaged. There's something that's raised off the ground. Maybe there's a point at which the whole structure itself would be damaged. But for each different critical asset, we're going to have to come up with that number, because that number is going to help us know at what point is it vulnerable. The following step is to figure out the probability of exceedance data. So that's basically what is the risk that that area is going to flood. And one of the unique things about the model that we're going to be using is that it's not a typical bathtub model. So this map that you see here of the Boston area is pretty much one flat surface elevation for the water at roughly 12.4 feet elevation. It's all yellow, it's all one level. But this isn't reality. Waves push up into certain areas, dams hold things back. Our model takes into account all kinds of currents, waves, winds, the way forces push things up narrower estuaries. And in Boston, the reality is something more like this, where the areas that are red are going to get much higher water elevations than what you would predict from a simple bathtub model. And the areas in blue, significantly the Charles River, are behind a dam. So even though it's a pretty low-lying area, that structure is actually protecting it. And so by using a more detailed hydrodynamic model, and this is what basically the technology we're going to apply here in Falmouth, we can get really high-resolution information about what's at risk where in town, and use that in combination with your asset data to figure out what's vulnerable when. This is an example of what the results maps are going to look like. Kind of a rainbow of risk. The darker blues are a higher risk of flooding. This is present day, as an example in Chelsea, north of Boston. As you get into the pinks and then the greens, it's a slightly less risk of flooding. The light green is today's 100-year floodplain. And as you get into the yellows and pinks, that's sort of your 500 and more year storm. But as we click through 2030, 2070, you can see how larger areas have a chance of flooding, and the areas that had a low chance of flooding in 2013 have almost 100% chance of flooding in 2070. Now, this is during a storm. These are probabilities during a storm. We will also have future projected mean high water lines, which I think is also critical. So you don't want to know just what's happening on a bad day, but where's the water going to be on a regular day? So we will have these kinds of results throughout town. And then what we do is we take, for example, some site that you have in your town and see where it overlays with this risk. In this case, there is some asset in Hingham, in this example, that overlays with a 5% risk in this dark green area. And this graph's a little tricky to think about, but basically what happens is we'll do this at 2030, and then we'll do this at 2070. And the map you just saw was the 2030 map. And that means that at a certain elevation, you're first going to hit that at the 5% storm, which is a 20-year storm, basically. As you start going up in elevation, that's really a less percent chance storm. So your 100% year storm is less of a chance than that. However, to get to that same elevation in 2070, it's only going to take a 50% chance storm. That's a 2-year storm. That's something that's likely to happen. So your chance of hitting your critical threshold elevation for a particular asset gets higher, and your chance of getting a much higher water elevation also gets higher. So we'll have a curve like this for every asset in town. What we then do is we take that and we calculate the risk to that asset. And risk is two things. Risk is a combination of probability of flooding, which we get from those maps, and consequence of flooding, which I'll show you in the next slide. And so here we have a risk at 2030, this is essentially the same numbers I was just showing you on that graph, and a risk at 2070. So again, you see it happening at a 5% risk and a 50% risk. But then you have to figure out the consequence of flooding. If something has a 100% chance of flooding, but nothing bad happens if it gets wet, it's not really a high priority item. But if something has even a low chance of flooding and it's critical that it never get wet whatsoever, the town would just shut down, we need to know what the consequence of that flooding is. So there'll be a number of categories that the steering committee is going to help us go through. How much of the town is affected? How long is it going to take to fix? What does it cost to fix? All these things are going to go into scoring the consequence of that flooding. And then we basically multiply that together to get a cumulative risk. We can actually add, in some ways, weight them together, get the 2030 and the 2070 risk together. And on the far right-hand column there, you end up with a composite risk score that you can sort, and you end up prioritizing all of your assets. And so the ones that have the highest priority will be up at the top, and we can start using this to start identifying our adaptation strategies moving forward, because it really picks out the things that need to be addressed sooner than later. Those adaptation strategies are going to take a whole number of forms. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of a strategy. We're going to work cooperatively with the steering committee. Woods Hole Group's going to have suggestions. If the Board of Selectmen have suggestions, we'd love to hear them. But we're thinking that these can fall into categories like protecting certain assets, building seawalls, floodgates, barriers. Well, hard structures are not always the way forward. Sometimes there's an asset that you just can't lose. Accommodating. Maybe you want to minimize the damage when something does get flooded. You know, having sacrificial structures to absorb energy or flood-proofing certain things. You may want to mitigate that risk by reducing a chance of future harm. And this could require zoning or permitting changes that affect future actions moving forward to reduce the risk that people are going to have. And then finally, retreat may actually be an option depending on the asset. It may just be simply a better idea to think about moving it to a safer location. And there are other actions as well. These are just examples. And then the final piece of all this is really public education and outreach. And this meeting here is actually part of that. So here, this is a televised meeting. You know, this is getting the word out to whoever's listening. We do have 3 of these meetings budgeted, so we can kind of update you and the public along the way as to what the results are that we found and what adaptation strategies we're coming up with. We have it in our budget to hold a number of additional info sessions. It may be one at the library, wherever we think we would get a good crowd from the public to really disseminate some of the findings that we have. And while this last part's not within our scope, I encourage the steering committee and the board and other members of the town, once we have some information, to actually get the word out in other ways, so it's not all just dumped on the town at the end, because some of these results can be kind of shocking, and it's good to kind of bring people along slowly, let them understand that while major changes might happen by 2070, that Falmouth is really thinking about it proactively, and we're going to do everything we can to keep the town safe and prepare for it. So it's not the end of the world. It's a good thing to be thinking about right now. So that's really our approach. What we've decided so far is that we are going to be using the sea level rise projections that Mass DZM suggests, that Mass DOT is using for their modeling, and that were developed by a combination of folks at UMass and Boston and Northeastern University, really taking the latest international climate change data and making it local, basically looking at a regional sea level rise, because not everything is the same around the world. So we are lucky in Falmouth to have the Woods Hole NOAA tide gauge station right here, so we have really local data that we can use to compare ourselves to. And those graphs I just showed and these numbers are exactly the same. They're just sort of, these are easier to figure out what the actual values are. Mass DOT is actually funding the model. So they're doing a statewide coastal flood model, and it's their results that we're actually using for this study. They have selected the high sea level rise scenario. Not everybody believes it's the high scenario. However, there's 2 good reasons for picking this one. One is that it's very unlikely that it would get worse than this. There's a 99.5% chance that what's going to happen is going to be not this bad. The other thing is, when you actually think about the curves, you can actually get results for other scenarios at farther out years. So this is just an example, don't quote me on this one. But say your flooding scenario from a high sea level rise risk at 2030 might be the same in 2070 for an intermediate flooding scenario. So you can use it to bracket your risk and kind of give you a, you know, if you really thought it was going to be intermediate or low, you'd be like, okay, this is a risk, but instead of 2030, maybe we don't get this till 2050 or 2070. So it lets you think about a bigger picture this way while also planning for sort of the worst-case scenario. Some of the choices we asked the steering committee to make were to select 2 out years to really focus on. We did have 2050 and 2100 as options as well, but we decided that 2030 is a really good short-term planning goal. About 10 years out. It's scary how quickly 2030 is coming up on us. But it's something that anything that comes out of our results now, you would want to take action as soon as you can to prepare for that. Whereas 2070 is more of a long-range goal. That's what you want to plan for in the long term. These results are in process right now for the Mass DOT contract, so we do have the 2030 results finalized and done and ready to go. They're going in order. So 2050 is sort of in process now. 2070 is coming in February. While I would like it sooner, that doesn't change the schedule of the project. It will work fine with what we're doing here, and I do think it's better to have 2030 and 2070 than 2030 and 2050. I don't think that gives you enough of a long-range planning. We will have those color ramps, those probability of inundation maps for both of these time horizons. In addition to that, we will also be producing depth of inundation. So not just the probability that something will get wet, but given a particular storm set, how deep will the water be in that location? So we chose for those depth maps the 1% chance storm, which, although we don't know quite what FEMA will do in the future, the 1% chance storm is essentially your FEMA map. So it's kind of your projected 2030 or 2070 FEMA map depths. Some towns chose to go for a 0.1% or 0.05% storm as like a worst case scenario depth. I kind of like what Falmouth Steering Committee chose to do here, which was to go to a more frequent storm. So at a 5% chance storm, this is your 20-year storm, if that's what you want to call it, you're more likely to see this happen. And so what are the depths that you really need to plan for at a more likely storm event? So these are the kinds of results that we're going to be producing for you. And this is the schedule that we're on. So we are in task 1 right now. We have completed everything up to the point of Board of Selectmen meeting. And I'm hoping if the steering committee and the board and anyone else who is reviewing the memo can get me comments by the end of the week, that we can actually have a final tech memo out by the 14th and stay right on schedule. This is a little bit fast to go through all of this, but we had promised the town we'd get it by June, and there's no reason we can't. So if everybody works to move forward, we can definitely stay with this schedule. I think that's all I had. There's kind of a lot of information that I didn't cover because I was trying to cram it into just a really short time, but I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Do you have an email to accept comments from, for example, anybody who's watching FCTV right now, who they should send their comments to, and by what date?
Do you want those? So Jennifer McKay, and I don't know her email off the top of my head. Is it J. McKay? J. McKay at falmouthmass.us.
Time being for this week, right?
Yeah.
And when would you need those comments by?
I would love them by Friday, which is, what, the 7th? If they trickled in after that, we wouldn't ignore them. This is a interim technical memo, so the final deliverable isn't out until June. So we can certainly take people's comments at any time during this whole process.
And did you include, I didn't see it, but for example, communication facility, like cell towers, or things that make municipalities run when there is any kind of emergency, that
We
kind of thing?
didn't unless there's some that the town owns, which I don't know
So, for
that
example,
happens.
the police communications, whatever
There
towers
is
they
a tower at the fire station
maybe,
that-
I'm just curious
that
if
we
you
did
even looked at
include.
it.
We looked at anything that we could find that was town-owned. So there is what is the tower at the fire station? A wireless interconnect.
Okay.
But unfortunately, most utilities are Verizon or something that is not town-owned. It gets tricky at that point because it's harder to get the information about them because it's not plans and data that you have in-house. It's also harder to push for changes because they're not your changes to make.
Sure, no, I get the
I
concept, I just
I
didn't know
think,
what you
however, you will end up with all of this data at the end and the GIS layers at the end. So if you wanted to go forward and overlay that on where the communication towers were, you do have a great GIS staff here. Bob could probably tell you where the additional risks lie that are non-town assets, you know.
Just for emergency planning. Doug?
Yeah.
How do you envision us identifying the different heights of these flood locations?
The critical elevations of the assets? It's a great question. It depends on the asset. So things like parking lots will be easy. We can get those off of LiDAR data. There are some buildings in town, and some I already have plan sets that actually tell you the first floor elevation. If it gets trickier when there's something like I'm going to pick on the Woods Hole drawbridge generator, for instance. So that's something sitting in a box outside of a building. Someone's going to have to tell me what elevation that's sitting at.
But the other thing is that Woods Hole Bridge, all the components are underground.
Yes.
There's that bulkhead that they built there to.
So for that, the
protect
critical
that.
elevation is the lip of the bulkhead.
Right.
Because it takes, it's whatever point the water needs to get to affect the important piece.
Right.
And so for every single asset in town, what you're actually looking for is a little bit different. So for one, it might be the base of a generator. For one, it might be the lip of a bulkhead. For some, it's just going to be the first floor elevation. And where we can't find it, we'll approximate with the ground elevation on outside of the building. So we'll find a proxy elevation for everything, but the more specific we have about internal placement of things, if everything's 2 feet off the floor, even in some building, well, we don't want the floor to get wet. Maybe everything stays fine unless the water comes up 2 feet. That would be useful to know for our evaluation.
So how do you think we're going to get that?
It's going to be a team effort. I was very pleased to see during the steering committee how many departments came. We had the library, police, fire, schools, DPW. So there's folks from all across town that can go and research their handful of assets and not really have this giant list of things on any one person's plate. And for many of them, I know Peter actually has already helped me, sending me plans for some of the buildings. So they have first floor elevations on them right there that's really easy to pull out once we have the right piece of data.
Are you going to send us more lists, or are you going to work directly with DPW?
The list that we're working from is in the memo, so there's a lot of appendices to that. The actual text of that memo is like 4 or 5 pages, and there's a lot of tables. So what we'll have to do is probably assign certain departments, say, you know, these are the 5 assets I think are going to fall under you, and these are the 3 that I think are going to fall under you, and they might say, well, I got nothing to do with that one, and we can reassign it, but I'll start with some kind of a list for each person.
Good.
Any other questions?
Nope. Great
Great.
report.
Really
great. Thank you.
useful. Thank you very much.
Well,
and
thank
thanks
you
for
so much
submitting.
Got a
for
question?
taking
Please
the
come
time.
right up.
Oh.
I'm Tom Duncan from Precinct 1, and first of all, I want to be very complimentary. It's almost amazing what's gotten done so far and what the future holds. It's a very well organized, very quantitative approach. But you did mention the possibility of several semi-open public presentations, and I would just strongly suggest that well in advance, at least a week in advance, that you post the stuff on town website, the thrust of what that presentation is going to be, and widely publicize that it's available, because I think you'll get a lot more focused public feedback in it. And that's all I have to add.
Thank you. Important point.
Thank you for the comment.
Anybody else? Terrific. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Good job.
Thanks, Elise.
Next, we have a request for a sign variance, Falmouth Water Stewards Water Station County Road.
And for disclosure, I'm a member of the board of the Water Stewards, but I don't have any interest in the end result, other than the, I'd like to have a drink.
To us all. Hi, Alan. Would you introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you. Alan Robinson. I'm here, resident of Falmouth and representing the Falmouth Water Stewards.
Excellent.
And we are here. We have obtained funding for the 3rd water station, water kiosk. The location, you received information in your packet, is along County Road in North Falmouth at the very north end of the bikeway. We have, it's a very similar station to the first two that were installed this summer and have operated very well throughout the summer. It's a little bit, the differences are in appearance. The donation for these came from the Rowan family in memory of Mary Ann Rowan, who was a teacher in town, a long-term resident in town. And she was an avid bicyclist, and she liked the color yellow. So the family asked if the water station, the base color could be yellow, and we the Falmouth Water Stewards, considered that and had our designer come up with a preliminary design, and we liked the yellow. And they also asked if they could have in the thank you, the dedication, if they could have a photograph of Mary Ann on a bicycle, and we thought that was a good idea as well. And so that's the image we've included. The actual photograph itself is not more than 4 or 5 inches high, like 5 by 9 or so. And it's an attractive-looking station, and we hope to be able to get your approval that we're going through the same process as before. But we the Falmouth Water Stewards obtain the funding. We will, once you approve this, we will then make the purchase. When it's received, it'll be shipped to the water department, and the town will be the owner of it. As per agreement with the water department, the water stewards will be paying the cost for not just the water station itself, but for the concrete for the pad. And the town will do the installation, and the town will ultimately own it.
Do you know, is this a historic?
It is not.
It is not. Just curious. Any other questions? Sam?
Alan, could you describe how close will it be to County Road?
The location that we're proposing it in, it's probably at least 20 feet to the north of County Road. We had hoped, ideally, to put it along the bikeway itself, south of County Road. But at that location, the bikeway, the paved bikeway, is above the grade. And so the asphalt of the bikeway would have to be opened up for the pipeline, and that would, the additional cost associated with that, and without having additional funds for that, and talking with Steve Rafferty, he didn't really have additional funds, at least at that point. And so we're going to the north side in the parking lot, and the Rowan family not only is providing the money for the water station, but for a picnic table and a little bike repair stand similar to near Station Avenue.
So this is in the parking area?
It's
Yes.
in that center island to the back part of it.
Gotcha.
It's more really like 60 or 70 feet from the road.
Okay, I got a picture of it. But the fact that it's in the center, I just wanted to make sure it was pretty obvious to people who either finishing their ride or starting their ride.
And where that kiosk is on the bikeway, the information kiosk, there'll probably be some information saying water, that way.
And I mean, that parking lot is so highly utilized, particularly in, the nicer months, that I think that's a wonderful location. I think it'll be a really nice improvement, and a beautiful tribute to Mary Ann, and she and her husband both contributed so much to this community, and Mr. Owen still on bikeways and on all the work that he has done. I think that's a really lovely legacy for her.
It's a great, go ahead, sorry.
I have 2 questions, and is this actually on the kiosk itself, what we're seeing, the visual, or is this an additional sign?
That is on the kiosk itself.
And then, so further maintenance of it will then become part of the town. The one thing we do have to be a little careful of is I like the fact that the water stewards are doing this and then giving it to the town. This is something that we actually have a very lengthy process, is how the town could put something in memory of anybody. And actually takes about 2 years if we follow our policy of requests for signs, but if it's done by the water stewards on their decision and then given to us, I think it's a little different situation.
Correct.
It's also pretty discreet as well. It's not something you're going to see from County Road. You're going to have to be right there at the water station to even.
Right, but I do worry if the town were agreeing to this thing, where do we then start drawing the line as to who gets things named after them? And not that this is not a earthly worthy cause, but there are a lot of other worthy people and causes out there too.
Right.
It's a great picture of her too, especially being on the bike there, right? Yeah, perfect for the bike path.
Is someone ready to make a motion?
I would move approval of the sign variance, request for sign variance from the Falmouth Water Stewards.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Great,
Thanks,
thank you very
Alan.
much.
Great. We next have an update on the change in the town email address to @falmouthmass.gov. MA, right. Mr. Suso, do you want to tee this up for us, please?
Certainly, thank you. Selectmen will recall that we have been advising for some time that for a variety of reasons, including security reasons, that the town needs to transition to a new email address. And as the board's further aware, we've had the longtime falmouthmass.us moniker, and moving to the falmouthma.gov is a much more secure approach, will allow and be consistent with an upgrade in the town's email system. And IT Director Greg Banwarth is going to give us further description and information about this exciting change to come.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Suso, Madam Chair. I appreciate the time. So there are two things I want to talk about that are very closely interconnected. One is the transition of our website from falmouthmass.us to .gov. Very simply, the address that is on top of any browser is going to move from falmouthmass.us to falmouthma.gov. Just a really quick picture of what that would look like. Doesn't look very significant, but behind the scenes, there's a lot of good things going on. Actually, it's going to be, as far as the website address is, pretty interchangeable for a while, if not the foreseeable future. So you can, right now, I probably did it about 1,000 times yesterday and giggled each time, but you can type in falmouthma.gov and it will actually get you to the same website that falmouthmass.us is. Now, as you're exploring the treasure trove of information that we have on our website, at some point in the future, we would like to have hit this target in a year or less. You'll always see falmouthma.gov on the top of the browser as opposed to falmouthmass.us. And why are we trying to do that? Well, the .gov namespace is very important for town and federal entities. It's actually a 3 to 4 month process that we had to go to with the federal government to get our .gov URLs. The reason for this is pretty simple. The .com, .org, .us namespace is basically a public domain. So just about any company or entity can grab those things, and we've seen an increase in a number of services, and I'm doing air quotes with that, that are actually just masquerading state or municipal services with an extra cost on it. And they don't really care if you confuse their website for an official one. So we find that the public is, with each passing day, becoming more and more aware of .gov namespaces in relation and relating that to legitimate county or state and municipal services. For our main website, that's going to go from falmouthmass.us to falmouthma.gov. Likewise, for the fire department and police department, which have their own namespaces, they're going to move to falmouthfirema.gov and falmouthpolicema.gov, respectively. And most importantly, for this discussion, it's also allowing us to do a couple tricks in the background and upgrade a very antiquated, and to be frank, inadequate these days email system that the town has been on. It's a very old and extraordinarily complex system, so upgrading it to what we consider to be the golden standard, which is the Microsoft 365 Live service for government domains, is an extraordinarily Herculean process that we've been going through. We've been very happy with the pace at which we've been doing it. It's going to offer each member of the town just a whole new suite of functional communication tools. To use a real case, we had to jump the gun a couple days early and upgrade Chief Dunn onto the system kind of in the middle of our testing phase because his old email account failed last week. Our old system just couldn't handle the load that a police chief gets, such as Chief Dunn. So that was actually quite successful, though as you'll hear me talk a little bit, we're still getting up a lot of the documentation and training that we want to give to each person that's using the new system, as well as a very detailed schedule and project management plan, some of which the public can peruse to see who exactly is getting converted when on this new email system. What we're marrying that with, which is very important, we're kind of cascading a number of projects on there, is something we call unification of names. Right now, if we look at town employees within the town, we've got a 50% mix of a username format that is first letter, last name, aka G. Banworth, to use as an awesome example. What we're trying to do is more of an accepted standard for institution of our size, which is first name dot last name. And we're going to see this really first in email. It's going to slowly over the years bleed into other important and essential systems within the town. Right now that people are still going to be using their old username to log into their personal computer, but again, we hope to change that in the next year. The intent here, and this is really for security and compliancy reasons and stuff like that, we don't want to go onto a system and look for G. Banworth, not knowing that that user account actually falls under the full first name dot last name. So we're really looking for that uniformity. This is a great chance to do that, and the reason for that is the town has to change their letterhead and business cards with the .gov change. So the reason that we're marrying the username changes with it is knowing that everyone's going to change their business cards to reflect the falmouthma.gov email address is a good opportunity for us to tackle this other problem. So we're in a pretty unique situation that many other municipalities and organizations are wrestling with these kind of username problems for decades sometimes. So we have intending to get ahead of it and fix it before it becomes a major issue for us. So I just want to talk to you guys about the disruptions that the public will see, and as users of our email systems, some of the improvements and challenges that we're going to be going through. And the biggest disruptions are going to be with email. My argument is they're not going to be very much for town employees and anyone on the system. We don't expect any more than half an hour of their time, kind of one-on-one, or we sit down and kick off a couple of sections to migrate their old mail off the old system onto the new system. The really important thing to note is just like the website URL, that if anyone is messaging the old email address, in this case we'll pretend it's gbanworth@falmouthmass.us, it will land every single time into their new mailbox, and that the person sending the email to that old email address will get an auto response saying your email has gone through. We're asking you to update your contact list, and hopefully some short and quick directions on how to update your contact list and a lot of popular things. We're going to continue that trend. We're effectively managing 2 email systems, which can be a bit of a burden, but we're going to continue that until we feel we've run some statistics and that we know that the old email addresses are not being hit that often and are not being utilized. I suspect right now that's going to be until around July of 2019. One of the reasons that I can't show you specific scheduling yet is we need a couple dozen accounts under our belt to computate timings. Right now I'm thinking this is anywhere from a 3 to 6 month rather work-intensive process. But thanks to the town manager's office, HR, and everyone else, we've gotten some extra help in to carry us through it. Again, we're not expecting too many frustrations with the switch, but with any sort of change on this level, there's always going to be some odd challenges that we're going to identify as the problem comes up and try to inform people via different ways. We haven't identified anything major. There's occasionally, if you're subscribed to something with the town email address, as it tries to give you an update on the old email system, it may kick out, that service may kick out an error saying, I don't know what's going on. We're going to evaluate each of those on a case-by-case basis. But so far, our tests have not showed many more challenges than we've identified during the testing phase. The .gov transition of actually URL of what's going to be on the top of your browser, we have a lot more timing on that, on when we can actually execute that. I would expect the disruptions to be minimal to none, though it's going to be quite nuanced path for us to get to that eventual goal post of every single website that you go on for the town has at the top of the page the falmouthma.gov address as opposed to that falmouthmass.us address. Just because there are a lot of different systems we want to make sure are happy before we make that transition. Again, all of this stuff will be publicly tracked for general overviews for the public, but internally we hope to provide intricate detail of what exactly the department is moving over at what time and allow people different scheduling of things to minimize operational hits. And that's really about it. If there are any particular questions, I would ask that you go through our trouble ticket system at ithelp@falmouth.freshdesk.com. Notice that's a separate email system as we upgrade. I would love to field any questions if anyone has anything about the process. Yes, sir.
Two. One, I guess, I understand that if we receive an email, it may come to the different addresses. We also send an email out to us as to how to change either our phones or our computers at home to make sure our outgoing email is the new email address on the outgoing server, the SMTP, and having to change all that.
Yes, sir. In that process, once we get to the point of lighting up the Selectmen's accounts and things of that, should be rather easy. For the most part, thankfully to the new system, it's rather simplified. You're just putting in an email address and a password.
Second is that at one point it said that each new email address will also have access to a Microsoft Office 365 account?
Yes, one way or another. There are actually one of the strategic one of the shifts that we're seeing in this model, which is pretty common with a lot of IT services these days, is we go from perpetual licensing, and oddly enough, even though it's an email system, we really go to leasing licensing. So even though it's email, Office will eventually with the town be leased to the Microsoft email system. So we're kind of migrating our perpetual licenses, the licenses that we bought, and we'll slowly be moving those over to a more expensive yearly tier, but it ultimately saves us money in the long run. So that's kind of a complicated answer to a simple question, but one way or another we'll make sure that the Office matchups are functioning fully and that people have access to them.
Great, thank you.
Just a question and then a couple of comments. The question is, did you look at the county's access to licensing? Because I think the county is now packaging some licensing that might give the town some benefit.
Yeah, so there are two licenses that we're playing with behind the scenes. One is called Tier 1 license, and that is just basic email functionality. We actually have a couple of other systems in this that are behind the scenes that do things like unlimited archiving, which is becoming more important for security and compliancy rules. Some really stuff that I superly geek out on, which is like legal holds become a lot easier for us to attain, and other particular metrics. Very exciting stuff. That's Tier 1. It just provides that email. Tier 3 actually comes with Office 365. And we definitely intend to move the town to that tier when our perpetual licenses start to become moot. Because again, that difference in tier cost is about the same as what we pay with a perpetual license. Does that answer the question?
It does. I was just really focused on whether you were using the buying power of the county to make it a little cheaper for the town.
Yeah, and with the .gov accounts, we consulted with the Cape Cod Commission and a couple other municipalities, and the prices are pretty set in stone.
Okay.
There was talks at a conference of possibly banding together to get a $10,000 or $20,000 licensing thing, but we are not familiar with any of the states that have been able to do that yet with Microsoft. They do command that pricing pretty well.
Oh, yeah, understandable. And then just the comment is that, this is so well dovetailed with the Selectmen's communication initiative in our strategic plan. We've been working for a number of years now on coordinating communication, and just having tools that will expedite the planning, the coordination, ultimately, simple things like permitting. I think this will all have a trickle-down effect, and you seem to really have anticipated all the typical quirks that happen, and you seem to really have a plan set forth in addressing each and every one of them, and that, I think that really provides confidence not only to the board, but also, just in working with the town staff in general and the intersection with the community. And, as folks have questions, it seems like you're really ahead and anticipating, being able to put messages on the website, really guiding folks where they can get the best information, and the system will be fail-safe for a while until the transition is over. So I just wanted you to know how much that's appreciated, and the little gems in the presentation about how the current communication stinks and all that kind of fun stuff. It's really, it's kind of confidence building to neophyte computer folks who don't really get the stuff that flies over your head, but really, the bottom line is there. So thanks for that.
Yeah, thank you. And I'd just like to add, this is probably my 4th major email conversion for an institution. And the team that I have on this has been one of the most exciting endeavors that I've had, because everyone is extraordinarily on the ball with it. I wish I could take more credit for the design of it, but there are much more smarter people in my office than I, which isn't saying much, but so very lucky to have that.
Thanks for saying that,
But
Megan.
none more motivated.
Yeah.
No, just to follow up in some respects to what you're saying, Sue, that, obviously the number one component of government is to be able to hear from constituents. And so anything that makes that system, people certainly call, but more and more email is the way that people, and the web is the way that people try to access the services that the town has and access the people that provide those services. So, when you're highlighting some of the things, and it's not that it's endemic and happening all the time, but any lost email is problematic. Any amount of time spent searching and finding emails, taking away from other services for the town is problematic. So just to be able to sort of identify that that's going on and really, in a holistic way, tackle it. It's like Sue's saying, it's really tackling not just this board's focus on communication, but really the entire purpose of good governance is hopefully to have that flow of information and communication, and this is really paramount. So thank you for that.
Madam Chair?
Yep.
I'm sorry.
I just wanted to comment that this really is a real problem that you're dealing with here with the hijacking. When, you try to renew your registration and you think you're on the registration thing, and all of a sudden you're realizing you're on some other money-making,
Phishing.
yeah.
Good, very good point. Peter?
I just wanted to point out one of the nice features of this system that you as members of the board will particularly appreciate is the web-based remote access will be so much better than the clunky system that you have now for accessing your selectmen email. So that will, it'll be an interface much more familiar to Outlook users or any user of a modern email
Something
system.
modern.
Yeah.
If anybody finds the new tools and tool sets, especially the web-based application, inferior, then I will eat my hat. So I think it's really hard to go from the system that we're not and not be very excited about the possibilities that this brings. So I think it'll bring a lot of, again, tool sets, as you said, Madam Chair, to the table that we can utilize as a town to effectively communicate. We're very excited about it.
If you want to go and take a half an hour and go up to the IT, they can hook you up with putting your email on a regular program. I've got mine on. I don't have to go to the website to do it.
Yes, sir, but you also have to listen to us for 4 hours, kind of geek out about the new system.
Worth it.
Great choice. Thank you very much. Great presentation, and I'm sure we'll be following up soon. It's a great segue into Peter's set next coming up, because the board at strategic planning, I think a year, not this most recent, but even before that, we continuously talk about trying to organize our responses to constituents. A lot of times, we get single communications that we want to be sure are properly shared, but don't infringe upon the open meeting law, or we want to be sure that folks know that we've seen the email, it's being considered and brought into the process. We want to give that feedback and that recognition, but we want to do it in an organized fashion. And then we also want to coordinate all this information with the proper project. So Peter's been working hard on pulling all this together, and thank you for that. Please let us know how you're doing it.
Sure, this is really pretty bare bones. I'm just going to describe briefly the sort of low-tech approach that we are now taking, and then we are certainly open to discussion and suggestion with the board about any changes that you feel might be helpful. So just, looking at email correspondence on behalf of the board, as you all know, but the public may or may not be aware, we have an address, Selectmen at, and I'll just say Selectmen at because we know it's what it is and it's going to change too. That email is the best way to reach the board because, of course, the Board of Selectmen acts as a full board. An individual member of the Board of Selectmen doesn't have authority to take action as an individual. So we encourage folks to use that joint email address, and those messages are forwarded to each of the 5 members of the Board of Selectmen, as well as to the town manager and to myself. As of Halloween of this year, we set up an auto reply so that anyone who's writing to that address gets an email back and just a brief explanation that, yes, all 5 members of the Board of Selectmen have received your email, and if there's something that requires a staff response, I'll show you what the exact text of that auto reply in a moment. But so there's now an immediate acknowledgement that, yes, your message was received, and this is sort of how it works. And then from there, it's hard to create a one-size-fits-all response because, you have everything from, spam, informational email from an organization to an individual writing about a pothole, on a particular street. So depending on what the nature of the message is, either a perfectly appropriate action is no response to an informational message, or a very individualized response. And the town manager is the one who handles the bulk of it. Those that do require an individual response, I occasionally jump in, and Chairman Moran often jumps in as well. And that's catch as catch can, of course. Whenever any of us responds, we're good about copying the other so that we don't have duplication. So this is that auto reply that I mentioned. It's pretty straightforward. Thanks to the individual for contacting. All members have received the message, and then a note that if there's a need for service from a department, you'll receive further response from a staff member. So then, in terms of how do we track it? Well, my work life is generally my email. That's how I organize things. That's how I track things. It's date stamped. It's threaded so that you can get the full length of the conversation and the history of the conversation. So what we understand to be best practice in general in terms of maintaining email is actually not to spend a lot of time necessarily manually creating a lot of folders, because that can quickly get confusing where there might be overlap between multiple subjects and you don't know which folder to put it in. So we generally use the search utility. If we want to find something, we search by date, we search by subject, we search by keyword, we search by sender, etc. And then in terms of coming sort of back to Selectmen correspondence and how we manage it, again, the bulk of it is purely informational, but obviously sometimes there are issues that are going to come back to the full board on an agenda. And so certainly when that is the case, we can consolidate all of the messages on, whether it's Route 28 widening. If that's going to be on an agenda, the board wants to see, okay, collect for us the correspondence we received on this issue. we can certainly put that together in a PDF document and include it in the Board of Selectmen packet so that you have that. You've already seen it once when it first came through, but a reminder, here's the full compilation of what was received, which might be over the course of a couple of weeks or, months, as the case may be. So, other considerations, we don't, as a rule, copy all members of the Board of Selectmen on all responses that we give to this, and the reasons for that, again, it's, there's a lot of variation. It depends on the email. Partly, we just don't want to inundate you with a lot of benign responses. The other thing that can be an issue, but we can certainly work through it, is we try to avoid putting the board into temptation in terms of open meeting law violation and deliberation. So sometimes when there's a response and all of the board members are copied, there's an inclination to ask a follow-up question or make a suggestion, and that quickly runs afoul of the open meeting law. So again, open to discussion on that, but that's why oftentimes you don't necessarily get copied on all of the responses that we give to email received at this address. And of course, the chair, the one clear pass that we do have is for scheduling purposes, and so the chair can put something on a Board of Selectmen agenda. That's as close as we can get to an action that the selectmen can take via email without engendering issues with the open meeting law. So that's pretty much it. The auto reply and the ease with which we can retrieve email messages is going to be many times better when we migrate to the new system. And I just open up to your discussion at this point.
Sure. So the reason for this agenda item was partly so the public would understand the way that communications come in and what happens to them after. And in terms of, Peter working on a process, as chair, I wanted to be sure, first of all, that folks understood that their comment, their inquiry was in fact received. So there's that confirmation. And the next part of this agenda item is really for discussion among the board. This is sort of a first draft of how this might work, and I thought it dovetailed nicely with the new email process. But one thing that I think that folks at home, citizens, should understand, there's a lot that goes on in the background when an individual selectman gets an email. All of us have particular things we're interested in. We were just talking about, Doug with the coastal issues, or Doug Jones just, was looking at fire stations earlier. We all have our committee liaison interests, and we all have particular things we're working on. That will continue despite this confirmatory, communication process. And so the board, a lot of times I know when, as chair, if I get an inquiry for, up until now, when I'd respond, I would sometimes, unless there is an open meeting law issue, I always copy the particular selectman who has an interest. I mean, I think all of you have seen that. But I know as chair, I was interested in all of your thoughts about how this might work in the future, what you might want to tweak, whether you think this makes sense, and just to really, we're doing a lot more communicating. We're doing a lot more outreach. We're doing a lot more encouragement of the public giving us feedback. So I wanted to be sure everyone understood the way it was working so far.
Yeah,
Megan?
I love the idea of the automated response, and I think what you put is perfect, given the challenge of covering kind of all the bases of what we get for communication. So for people to know that it's actually been received, I guess the one place where I still see a potential, maybe a potential place for improvement is, so, I mean, the volume, I know the volume that we get, and you guys are getting, meaning Julian and Peter, even getting more, because you're getting emails from department heads, from, many other things that don't come to us. So I'm wondering, and I think we had talked about this, and I'm not suggesting any kind of spreadsheet folder system, but I'm wondering, when it says that so something comes in, it sends a general comment. We sort of still don't know, if you're sending back a response. I understand you're trying to insulate from, number one, there's the issue about the potential for a violation of open meeting law if everyone starts commenting. But then the other piece is, there's the part that we don't know if a response, if that person, other than the automated response, has had that question answered. And it can be simple things I think you had already responded about a music issue on the Village Green. It wasn't anything but there was no way for us to know that. And again, it's not as if we don't think you're going to do that. It's just that the volume is extensive. Sometimes things slip through the cracks. So I'm wondering, how we can think about, is there a way to know, check, particularly if it, sometimes it comes to all of us, but it'll have a particular selectman or a couple selectmen, named. And so for us to just be able to know that that individual has gotten an answer to their question or knows that the follow-up might be, as Sue says, sometimes these things are very complicated. What someone might be asking a very complicated question, it's not going to be answered in a day. It's going to take some research. It's going to take some time to get an answer. So I guess that's the piece that I still am a little bit concerned about.
I agree.
And again, not because I don't want, the feeling isn't that you're not answering people's questions. The feeling is just the volume is, so, how do we know that that person has kind of received that, further that beyond the automated?
Please.
Sure. So, there are a couple things that we could look at. The simplest one would be to just change our practice and copy you on all the responses. And, we can try that if that's something that the board's interested in. And if you find it's too much and it's overwhelming, you can say uncle and we can try something different. So that's one option. But if that's not what you were looking for, if you were looking for, can we come up with some sort of a system that would allow you to perhaps go and look at a system, something on a shared folder somewhere that shows you, okay, this happened to be on my mind. I remember this email from last week. I was talking to someone about it, so now I'm going to go look up and see if there was a response, and if there was, what that response was. Is
too complicated. Your first piece, I think.
Okay. There may be a way to do the other one as well.
No,
so
I
don't
understand,
want to
but I don't want to create more work. My point is that there is the workload is extensive enough, and I'm just thinking of ways that cut out that piece where, it happened a couple times this week where then I'm saying, did this person get a response? It's more, that again is more, there are more emails for you then to respond to that you shouldn't have to. It's just, I'm trying to think of
But that's also work that you don't need to be doing because it's not productive, that extra follow-up. So I really like the idea of copying because I think we're pretty much all now used to the fact that we're simply unable to have a conversation about it. So it's almost like getting a CC of a paper letter, where you get a CC for something and, a lot of times it's informational. Okay, great, that's done. And you don't necessarily respond to that. So I think that's a very good point. Sam?
No, I have to say that that's kind of the way it's been done for me anyway. Whenever somebody has asked me a specific question targeted to mine, if I forward it to Julian, he always copies me on his response to that individual. I don't feel like I've been left out. And if there is something that kind of went across my correspondence, and I want to follow up, all I've done is just drop by and say, Julian, whatever happened, with this particular issue? And he's been very forthcoming in letting me know this is what happened. I passed it on. And this is the result of that communication. So
I think when it's been an individual selectman that brought it to us, then we would, Julian or I would routinely include that individual selectman because you don't have a deliberation issue there.
Right.
But open to looking at the group emails as well.
I hear you.
Doug?
I like the idea of the copying to selectmen because it's simple, it's done, we can look and find it, we know it's there, we don't have to respond, we can just know that it's done.
And actually, on our own email, if we want to know the status of something, we can do our own search too. So what you said in terms of organizational also works with your point.
Right, and sometimes, I'm sorry.
The two things I'd be careful of, I think I would still trust Peter and Julian if there's anything approaching a topic that could be deliberated, then don't send that as a CC. But the other one is if we individually get a question that is coming to the close of, we are reporting on the board's position, we all individually need to just have that go right to Selectmen at Falmouth, Mass, and then it gets taken up by Julian, Peter, or Sue, that we, as individuals, really should not be responding to anything that could be the public statement about the board.
Good point.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think Doug raises a good point that, with that copying, there comes a level of, it's the responsibility we already have, but really an awareness of that responsibility, not to get, it's very easy to, especially with email, because it's a couple clicks and you send it, to that temptation to want to respond in a way that sounds like it could be from the board, or that crosses that line to be deliberative, so.
Right. And remember, you can always, as individual members of the board, you can always email Julian and me. It's just emailing each other that is where the issue comes.
This was very helpful. Appreciate you updating everyone on where we're at, something we've been working on off and on for quite a while. The next item on the agenda is to announce the April 2019 town meeting schedule. Thank you. Selectmen are announcing today, Monday, December 3rd, 2018, the annual town meeting schedule. We will close the warrant for 2019 on Friday, January 18, 2019. We will vote the articles and execute the warrant on Monday, January 28th, 2019. We will publish articles only Friday, February 1st, 2019. Presentation on petition articles will be Monday, February 11, 2019. Selectmen will vote recommendations Monday, February 25th, 2019. Publish warrant with recommendations and mail warrant booklets Friday, March 22nd, 2019. And the April town meeting will be Monday, April 8th, 2019. And, this reminds me, having another town meeting coming so quickly. From the last town meeting, we had a lot of discussion about, coordination of petitioner articles in the event that there are, such initiatives or similar initiatives already going on in town hall. So maybe we can have an agenda item going forward about coordinating that. And, just coordinating in general. I know that Jennifer was going to kind of reach out and maybe do some informational presentation. So maybe we can just schedule at a next Board of Selectmen meeting, we were really trying to improve some of the issues that came up at the last town meeting, and I think it's a good time to schedule that before we get into these rapidly approaching dates.
Yeah, Madam Chair, just to
Please.
clarify what I was thinking Jennifer's comments were, that she currently is involved with the moderator, David Vieira, on an annual basis, sort of a mini town meeting primer. And I think that's what Jennifer's referring to
Yes.
the thought was including that potentially, a discussion on petition articles. And I know that, as you've noted, the moderator and others indicated some concern about the fact that with the many, the expanded number of petition articles we've been getting, that they haven't always been fully thought out in advance. And unfortunately, by the time they're filed with the Board of Selectmen, there is nothing we can do to change the text and the content of those, because you're essentially what's been signed and filed is what you're presented with, either putting on the warrant, or, well, in this case, always putting on the warrant. So I think the hope has been to encourage those who have petition articles to reach out in advance to, whether it's another town department, whether it's town council, a member of the Board of Selectmen, the moderator, to make an attempt to do a little bit more advanced work, so that it comes in form that is a little more prepared.
And I think the idea is to reach out and assist folks with that in terms of petitioner articles, but we also had a number of articles, not just petitioners' articles, that had numerous amendments on the floor. And so I think this is really a, kind of a pull our bootstraps up and really get organized kind of early initiative for the next meeting. So maybe the agenda item is just that Jennifer and the town moderator or town clerk might just announce some kind of plans to address those issues.
Okay.
So we'll look at that going forward. Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Please.
it seems like some of the petition articles really should have gone to a committee first, to kind of been talked out. Doesn't mean there's got to be a stop, It's just that there really needed to be some vetting before it actually became an official part of the warrant. And I think that would really be helpful if we can steer petitioners to a particular committee for an initial presentation and some feedback, because it would strengthen their petition for sure.
Absolutely. Megan?
Just to that point, I think that the petition around styrofoam was a great example, that the work that was done, it was too late for the warrant, but the work that was done by the petitioner to meet with solid waste, to meet with the health department, at the end, crafted really a good piece. Unfortunately, it was, all up on a screen because it was so late that it was really a completely different version than what we saw. So I think just people understanding that the process might be to, as Sam says, meet and identify what town committee, what department might be relevant to a particular, petition or article, or just article, period, in
Sort of a
some
triage
situations.
intake system kind of thing.
To direct people maybe, it just might be nice for there to be some system that helps people, give them that resource, this is who you might talk to. So some of that is just clearer when we get to, we're asking a lot of town meeting members. I know they're elected, but they're volunteers, they don't get paid, they give up 3 nights. And there was a real expressed frustration by a lot of town meeting members that, what took all of that time maybe shouldn't have, had there been more concise, clearer articles in front of them.
Absolutely right. Great.
Madam Chair, just one other comment,
Please.
if I may. It's part of the challenge that we have is that, and I know everybody in our office would agree that invariably, within a matter of days of the closure of a warrant article filing, we get an inquiry about it and a request for where can I find a form, and individuals run out and quickly assemble a petition article. That just seems to be, from time to time, an element of human nature. But certainly, and I think it's appropriate in the direction that you're identifying here, to encourage people to please get started early. Be thinking about this now, and this is the perfect time with the board considering this adoption of this schedule. Don't wait until the very last minute to look to the website or run into the selectman's office to try and assemble something with the requisite number of signatures on it, to go to the clerk's office, because oftentimes it will drag you into this very problem that we are discussing that unfortunately can derail what is, in many, many cases, a well-deserved concept to be discussed, but because it's not crafted timely enough and with the advance notice, it doesn't get the hearing that it could otherwise deserve.
And it's, it's those terms of timing and art that we want to address in this process that we're discussing now, because a lot of folks, you look at the deadlines we just read, and that the knowledge about how much preliminary work and how long that takes and how extensive that is, we don't have a process to tell folks that who aren't in municipal government. So this is about that, moving that education in a way that's beneficial to, to town meeting members, petitioners, selectmen, the entire town. So, and it's just about, making the process more productive and enjoyable for everyone. So this is just a good time to start talking about that, because it comes quickly.
Can I throw out the possibility, we might actually want to require an early submission by petition articles, preliminary, so that we can actually distribute it to the committee that might actually be able to vet that article, or proposed article.
I don't think we're allowed to.
Oh, right, it might be.
I think it's all state, the number of.
Well, it may be, but I mean, maybe it's advisory.
Okay.
But at least try to challenge people to get your petition articles in early enough so they can go to a particular committee, give you feedback on it, and potentially make it a much more informed article that they're petitioning for.
They'll be more successful and happier for all, because it takes a lot of work, a lot of interest.
Really, if someone has a petition article, they should be working on it as soon as town meeting's over for the next town meeting.
Right.
If they really want to be prepared. Because, so many times people see, oh, the warrant closes on January 18th, I better get mine in
The 15th,
placeholder.
right.
Everyone wants a placeholder the week before, and we have allowed it so many times, and it's a bad practice.
Well said. Next,
Do we have to vote those dates? Or just
Yes,
announce?
please.
Yes, we do, please.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Next, we have approved 2018 annual license renewals.
I'll move
Doug.
to start entertainment for the Portuguese American Club. Can we start with that one?
All alcohol is first, isn't it?
All alcohol.
I know.
So,
We actually can vote them, and then I can just,
I was just gonna start with that one.
yeah.
Megan and Brad, why don't you explain the consideration?
So I'm just disclosing, I'm the president of the Portuguese American Club. I don't make any money at all from that position. But just to disclose that, but our concern was just, we want to make sure the language included the outdoor area, which has always been something that we've used, and it does. I did take a look at it, and so it's perfect as is.
Okay, so I move for all alcohol restaurant, Anejo, Captain Kidd, Chapquake Grill, East End Tap, Epic Oyster, Estia, Glass Onion, Golden Sails, Grumpy's Pub, La Cucina Somar, Paul Harney Golf Club, Quahog Republic Dive Bar, Silver Lounge Restaurant, the Conference Table, and the Pizza Bar.
second?
All those in favor?
Aye. All Alcohol Club, the Cape Verdean Club, the Green Pound Yacht Club, the Portuguese American Club.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
All Alcohol Inn Holder, Falmouth Holiday Inn, doing business as Kansas City Bar and Grill.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye. All Alcohol Package Store, Kenyon's Market, Murphy's Package Store, Old Barn Package Store.
Second?
All those in favor?
Wine and Malt Restaurant, Silver Beach Pizza and Seafood.
Second?
All those in favor?
Wine, Malt and Cordial Restaurant, Dogs and Hogs.
Second?
All those in favor?
Wine and Malt Package Store, Ocean State Job Lot, MPG Corp., doing business as Rapid Refill.
Second?
All those in favor?
The Common Victualler, Anejo, Betsy's Diner, Black Dog Tavern, doing business as Heights Cafe, Cape Cod Bagel, Chapquoit Grill, Coffee Obsession 1, Coffee Obsession 2, Cupcake Charlie's, D'Angelo's Sandwich Shop, Dogs and Hogs, East End Tap, Epic Oyster, Estia, Eulinda's, Falmouth Holiday Inn, doing business as the Kansas City Bar and Grill, Glass Onion, Grumpy's Pub, La Cucina Somar, LBK LLC, doing business as Burger King, McBee Enterprises, doing business as McDonald's, Quahog Republic Dive Bar, Silver Beach Pizza and Seafood, Silver Lounge Restaurant, Starbucks Coffee Company, The Buffalo Jump, The Conference Table and the Pizza Bar.
Second?
All those in favor?
Inn Holder Victualler, Inn on the Square, Shoreway Acres.
Second?
All those in favor?
Entertainment, Cape Verdean Club, East End Tap, La Cucina Somar, the Portuguese American Club, the Quahog Republic Dive Bar, Silver Lounge Restaurant and the Pizza Bar.
Second?
All those in favor?
Their Sunday entertainment, Just La Cucina Somar.
Second?
All those in favor?
Why not the pizza bar?
They're not listed under Sunday entertainment.
Oh.
It's a note that we received from
Yep.
the office.
Okay, thank you.
Motor Vehicle Class 2, Falmouth Motor Car, Frank's Auto Sales, Rainey Trucking and Repair, Route 28 Auto Center, Wacoit Auto Sales.
Second?
All those in favor?
Motor Vehicle Class 3, Falmouth Salvage,
Second?
All those in favor?
and Vehicle for Hire, AA Taxi, All Seasons Taxi, and White Tie Limousine Company.
Second?
All those in favor?
If I could just request that when we get the seasonal ones, if we could just check to make sure on those licenses that we have not heard anything from the police department about any concerns of establishments. I am fairly certain we have not from any of these ones, but I do know that some of the seasonal ones we did have concerns in the past. Just make sure we have that report. I don't think those come up till March, but.
That's a good request, thank you. Next on the agenda, minutes of meetings, a public session on September 17, 2018.
Madam Chair, I have an edit to suggest on page 3, about halfway down the page, the paragraph starts, comment was made that it is difficult to have a decision. The third line, I guess, anyway, it says skewered, is that the right word? Which will need to
What
be.
page?
Seward.
Seward, yes, thank you. So the K is, thank you. I tried to make sense out of it.
Okay.
Page 3,
That makes sense.
Seward.
Yep.
On page 4, in the second paragraph there, it should be Brian Howes, not House, Howes, I think, isn't that correct, Peter?
Yes.
Yes?
Just to correct the name. And I'm sorry, there was one more I spotted.
Okay.
Oh, under 7, where it says, Mr. Patterson hopes the crack will remember Trunk River sewer pipe. It doesn't go through Oyster Pond. I would just simply strike going through Oyster Pond as 4 words and just put and combine replacement with sewering the Oyster Pond watershed area. And it should really be, which could help solve problems in that area, not that, just from a grammatical standpoint.
So is there a second with those edits?
Yes, second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Next, we have individual selectmen reports. Mr. Brown?
We had a bit of a busy week this week. I attended the planning board meeting the previous week, and they had a nice discussion about the Route 28 project, and Charlotte Harris was good enough to be willing to participate as the planning board's representative to that committee. I think that's good news. She's going to be good for that. This week past, I met with Eric Karplus and his assistant Kristen Rathjen at, on behalf of the Water Quality Management Committee. We went over and met with Brian Howes and Amber Unruh, and Amber was the graduate student who did the study of Mill Pond for us, for the East Falmouth Village Association, and hence for the Water Quality Management Committee. And one of Amber's suggestions was that currently Mill Pond is acting as sort of a tailing pond for the bog operation, and she suggested that a tailing pond be created at the base of the bog before it gets to Mill Pond to take some of the workload off Mill Pond. And so we met at the bog juncture with Mill Pond and met with Brian Handy over there, and Brian was willing to participate and help with the creation of a pond in that corner, and he's willing to give up the land and also provide a site in another area of the bog where we could remove the sediment too. Of course, pending permission of the Conservation Commission, but it was a good meeting, very productive, and I think that we're probably on the way to having that part of the solution worked out. Then
That's huge. That's been something that's taken a long time to get the attention it needs. That's great.
yeah, and then the next thing we did was went up to Brewster and met with Mark Forrest, who's the town administrator in Brewster, and also who was the other guy? Oh, Chris Miller, who is, I don't know exactly what his role is in town, but he's another town employee, something to do with conservation and wetlands management. And Brewster actually went out and bought a vegetation harvester, because they have several ponds that are over-vegetated from, their own septic issues. And so they've found out a machine which goes in the water with 2 pontoons and a big drying rack in the middle, and some cutting blades that are submersible, and there's like blades on the sides and also on the bottom. So this thing goes in the pond, cruises along, and snips off all the vegetation and pulls it up into the drying rack, and then they drag it out of the bay or the pond or whatever it is. So
Is it for rent?
it's possible for loan or some sort of a lease arrangement, and we haven't worked out the details yet. We're going to leave it to Eric to come up with a proposal to the town of Brewster for the town of Falmouth. And he's also taken a lot of careful measurements and photographs of the equipment. We went and looked at the machine in one of the old fire station, actually, they use for storing their buildings, which is a pretty smart idea. They built their new fire station behind the old one, and now they store their equipment in there in the wintertime. So the question will be whether or not their machine is too large for Mill Pond, because it takes about 1.5 or 2 feet of draft, depending on how much vegetation's on board. So Eric is tasked with figuring out whether or not that will work. If it doesn't work, we might rent a smaller machine, and we understand that you can hire somebody with a crew and a machine in the area of $15,000 to go in there and either cut or rip out the vegetation. Brewster wants to cut the vegetation because they're going to do annual maintenance They're cutting it with the hopes that it grows back, because the growth removes more of the nitrogen and phosphorus.
Carbon.
And Mr. Brian Howes said that in our case, it might be more beneficial to rip it out, rip the roots right out, because the vegetation is so dense, and the lily pads are just completely covering and preventing any sunlight from reaching in there. So it's yet to be determined exactly what we'll do, but very nice meeting. Mark Forrest was very amenable to helping us and working with us, and if we work this out, Mr. Miller will either come himself or send somebody down to work with one of our town workers, hopefully, who has a hoisting license, who would be capable of operating the machine. So they're very nice and friendly about sharing the information and possibly sharing the machine, and we'll see if it works out. And I also met last week on another, with the Charter Review Committee, and discussed ideas and things of note that, what I've noticed, a very smart bunch of people working on that. I'm glad they're doing it. Glad it's not me. Also, on Friday, Peter and I met with Judy Fenwick. I don't know if you remember at the listening session previously, Judy had suggested that the Citizens Handbook could be updated and improved, and she's done most of the work, honestly, of making the suggestions and pushing the whole thing. You know, we've worked as well, but she's done a lot of the work, and I suggested that we might name it the Judy Fenwick Handbook of Welcome to Local Government.
I love that idea.
So that's a work in progress. I know you, Sue, had suggested that we might include some indication, some Selectmen handbook type stuff, but I feel, and I think Judy also feels, that that might be a separate handbook for Selectmen. And if you look on the Mass Municipal Association, they've got a Selectmen's handbook that's actually 240 pages.
Yeah.
So we could take the preface from that and
Condense
put
a few
some
things.
condensed
It could be the
guidelines.
Cliff Note version.
Right.
Or an addendum.
So we've been looking at other town models, Judy has, and also we have. One thing I have been doing is some of the reading, and other towns do some things differently, and so we can maybe borrow some ideas and come up with a little more modern handbook.
That's great. I mean, that just brings the whole communication initiative really 360. And I think it goes a long way to recognizing all the work that the committees do, and, you know, in terms of their mission statements, and gives them an interactive opportunity to get updated. So thank you so much for taking on. It's a really big task that's very encompassing, and
Thanks to Judy for suggesting it and being willing to follow through with doing so much of the work.
Absolutely. Sam, anything?
Yes, 3 meetings. Friends of Nopska Board Directors met last week, and they're chugging along, getting ready to start the renovation of the 2 keepers' houses, or it's 1 keeper's house now, but it used to be, originally was 2. Also, the Conservation Commission met last week, and they actually went through the Farley Bog conservation restriction and improved it, as Laura mentioned. And then lastly, the CPC met, Community Preservation Committee met, and they were really doing the vetting process for town meeting, because, of course, there are a lot of regulations that applicants have to meet in order to be able to qualify for CPA funding, I guess. And that process, so they have 12 preliminary projects that they have approved as meeting the necessary requirements, and are moving those forward, and those will become articles that will be submitted as part of the warrant on January the 18th. So that's it.
I forgot something. Also, I attended the Housing Production Plan report by Karen Sonnenberg, and it was very interesting. A lot of broad view of where we're at. Currently, we have 6.9% affordable units in town, where we wish we had 10%. The 6.9 consists of approximately 900 units, plus or minus, and Karen is under the impression that there may be as many as 300 other units that could somehow qualify if they could just be brought into compliance. We're going to need to make 74 or 84 units of affordable housing per year to stay on track, and you know, we got a lot of work ahead of us, but it was an interesting report, and the planning board had a lot of interesting feedback to share about their concept of the Davis Straits redevelopment area and how that could be a big help towards our goals. So the big bottom line from the meeting was that everyone who's really thinking it through realizes that we're gonna have to get our minds around some higher density in some areas. And many times, we're up against density limits of 6 units per acre, where if you look at some of the smart growth in some other areas, you might not even notice it, but in the Davis Straits planning study, you might have 20 units per acre, and it blends in nicely. So we're gonna have to give some thought to increasing density where it's appropriate.
Julian, that might be a good topic for another joint meeting coming up. You know, and I think, you know, it comes up time and time again with housing expansion, the transportation aspect and how we address that. You know, I know Sam, being on the RTA board, might have some input, and I know kind of before my time, we had a transportation committee that we no longer have, but I know we do some other interactions, but I think it's good to, you know, look at housing and density along with transportation going forward, just the same way that we do, you know, with our sewer capacity. So maybe just have another kind of summit of all the you know, the committees and all the staff that work on all those issues, just to kind of inform the public of where we are and what we're looking at.
Very good.
Sam?
Yeah, I'd like to endorse that, because actually, I think it was, our town planner picked up on a presentation that was made at the Cape Cod Summit in August, and has brought that same architect in to present to the planning board. But I think we need to give some more tangible content to people's understanding of what density could look like. And they have some very attractive developments. But we do need to publicize that and give people a sense of just what could be, other than thinking about, you know, putting density out in relatively rural areas, because that's not what it's all about. But we really need to educate people as to what the potential is. And Doug's absolutely correct. The challenges are great, but we're gonna have to be creative about it. And there are people that have already been thinking about this in other communities, and we ought to tap into their experience.
And under the charter, we're already required to meet at least twice with planning, so let's go ahead and send an invitation to planning about what topics they may want to discuss. And then the planning chair and I can get together about putting an agenda together and inviting more boards based upon your recommendation.
Very good.
Thanks. Megan?
Nothing to report necessarily, but just to add on to, and I don't want to go too far down the discussion because it's not on the agenda, but the fact that if we're talking about, you know, it goes back to what we talked about with petitioners' articles, you have to really lay a foundation and do education and outreach and make sure you're connecting. And we've seen time and time again, the same thing happens with some proposals around, you know, sort of denser housing development, or when people hear the word affordable housing, and there's really just a very strong public reaction, a lot of which is based on, I think, a lack of information, a lack of real understanding about both the need. We saw that when, you know, comments came before us saying there's, you know, 300 homes right now on the market under 300,000, which I don't think is borne out at all by the actual facts, but so some education around that. And then, you know, some community discussion around what are some of the resources, you know, we want to bring to bear around transportation, centrality for some of these projects, and the way they can look, get that community input, because I think if we're not kind of constantly having that conversation and doing that education and outreach, really wonderful opportunities can come forward and they're going to be shot down. And the alternative is then something that we also have experience with, when you have kind of, you know, a really a different type of development model come in, where it's not favorable to the town, it's not coordinated, it's not a hand-in-hand type of project. So I think just, you know, it's incumbent upon us, upon planning, to really do that constant outreach and communication, not just with the town organizations, but with the community as well, so that it becomes something where people understand the problem. And also some of the really wonderful opportunities that are there to address the housing issue. So
It's foundational for the success of the projects, too.
And one other thing I heard at the meeting, which I hope we can put a different spin on, was some comments were made that we need to meet this 10% so we can stop these 40Bs.
just not the.
That's not really the right track. I hope we can reach the 10% so we can make the 40Bs better, because we're not gonna stop them. We don't wanna stop private development of housing projects. We just wanna make them more effective.
Want to participate more.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Okay, Doug?
I went to the Woods Hole Community Association meeting 2 weeks ago, and Betsy Gladfelter was there reporting on issues with the Steamship Authority. And the two major issues she was talking about, one was the new terminal building that has been presented. The number of people in Woods Hole are very concerned about the size of it, blocking the view, and it's being 4 or 5 times larger than the temporary one they have in place. And that was discussed more at the meeting of the Steamship Authority Board of Governors, which I also went to. The second issue that she reported on was also for the Board of Governors, was a fairly noxious odor that was being produced by the excavation they're doing. They did have the environmental team come and check to make sure that it was okay, and was not exceeding any limits for health but there was a concern as to where the excavation fill is actually going, as to whether it is going still into Falmouth, that Lawrence Lynch is the one digging it up, and we're trying to figure out exactly where that stuff is going to make sure it's not just being dumped someplace else in Falmouth to become a different hazardous issue, or is it being cleaned and then moved out. At the Board of Governors meeting, which I went to last Wednesday, again, the discussion about the terminal building was put forward. The architects Steve Sayers reported that the architects are going to look at it again, see if there's something they can do, hoping for some kind of compromise. The Steamship Authority is saying they pretty much are limited to, they have to have that size building. They had met with members of the Community Association, Business Association. I did report that this is happening in Woods Hole, which is a village of Falmouth, but actually the town it's happening in is Falmouth, and was requesting the Steamship Authority actually should be presenting concerns about the building to us. Officially, for our point, to be able to present what the town feels, not just what individuals in either Woods Hole or in different villages are, but that we are the actual governmental body that they should be communicating with. And Steve Sayers said that was an oversight, and they will be coming to us, but I did want to let you know that I had told them that they need to.
Very good point.
Oh, and Estia is open. Just Estia opened last week, and what a great addition to the community.
Oh, and how about that breakfast at the Portuguese American Association?
First Sunday of every month. This is a good community announcement.
Come on, give the disclosure.
Yeah, I don't make any money, I just serve the food, but we're continuing the tradition that the Holy Ghost Society does in the sort of warmer months, spring into the fall. So the first Sunday of every month, Portuguese American Club, the Navigator on Schumett Road, which is off of Sandwich Road, will be doing a breakfast. Was it $10? $8. And it's an enormous home-cooked buffet, all you can eat, really wonderful.
What
and 7:30 to 11:30. And it's just a great way for folks in the community to connect and to continue that really nice tradition that goes on in the summertime. So
Awesome.
It's a really good breakfast. I had it myself.
Yeah, sounds good. Mr. Suso, Town Manager's
Thank
report.
you, Madam Chair, members of the board. It is my pleasure to confirm, and the selectmen have, as you've also readily observed, that the supplemental entrance for westbound traffic on Main Street to the community center complex has formally opened as of today to better accommodate incoming traffic to this expanding service complex. Consistent with the approved design, which is, it's an entrance only for westbound traffic off Main Street into the complex. Signage has been installed to manage traffic accordingly. Eastbound access to this complex continues to be at the existing entrance across from Scranton Avenue, adjacent to the Marks Building. I want to express my thanks and appreciation to our colleagues in Public Works for the excellent work done in implementing this important access improvement. And yes.
If I just add in,
Sure.
a point that you made to me is that entrance actually was a part of the original design I think, 25 years ago.
It was indeed, yes. Part of the original approved site plan design by the planning board at that time for the original Gus Canny Community Center complex, and for reasons unknown to me, it was non-performed. But certainly it is a huge adjunct to the access, convenience, and public safety to that complex, which is particularly in its expansion phase. So it's amazing what goes around and comes around.
Best laid plans, as they say.
Indeed. Thank you for that reminder. Also, you will note over the past week that Public Works has completed their annual installation of Christmas, Hanukkah, and other related holiday decorations on the Falmouth Town Common. As we all know, this annual display is a much cherished tradition in Falmouth. My comments to Public Works for their steadfast work there. And also, as a reminder, the annual Holidays by the Sea weekend comes beginning this weekend, starting with Friday. Saturday evening is the Main Street Stroll from 5 to 8 p.m. downtown, and of course, Main Street, as we know, will be closed down once again and very well received. The actual tree lighting ceremony will be Saturday at 7 p.m., and of course, the traditional Christmas parade will be Sunday with a step-off at 12 noon, and as I'm reminded, it's the largest Christmas parade in New England, and it steps off on Dillingham and travels to Main Street, and we look forward to any and all joining us for that treasured community event.
And just to remind the folks that the parking won't be allowed on Main Street from 3 to 9 p.m. on Saturday, and I think all morning on Sunday, and any cars on Main Street during that time will be towed ahead of time.
Great reminder. Thank you.
Good, very important.
Can I add to your, Friday night is when you can go to the Nopska Light and sing Christmas carols, and they have some hot chocolate in the keeper's house. So the Friday start is legitimate, and it actually will start at Nopska Light for anybody that would like to join. I know that it's popular, the tower will be open, kids love it.
What time is that?
I think it starts at 5 o'clock.
5 o'clock. And how appropriate that the weekend of events kicks off at Nopska Light.
Absolutely. Peter?
Just a couple things. One note to add to that, met with DPW Deputy Director Peter McConaty this morning, and we're hopeful, fairly confident that Lawrence Lynch will be paving the exit driveway from Gus Canty out to Dillingham this week before the parade. Right now, it's a little wet and sticky, so that'll provide a much better runway for the parade. In addition, also on the same subject, there will be a groundbreaking for the Senior Center next Thursday at noon on site. We certainly welcome any of you members of the board who are able to attend to please do so. And lastly, met with the Shellfish Advisory Committee last week. They are working on looking at the various shellfish licenses that come before the Board of Selectmen, and they want to have sort of a conversation about which ones does it make sense for the advisory committee to take a look at before they come to this board for action. So you can expect to receive a recommendation from the advisory committee within the next month or two.
Great, that's great.
Move we adjourn?
Second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Great.
Welcome to the Falmouth Chamber of Commerce. The The Falmouth Chamber is dedicated to working on behalf of our members to make Falmouth a better place to live, work, and conduct business. We are committed to developing the economic, cultural, educational, and civic interests of our community and welcome the support from all organizations to achieve our combined goals. Whether you call Falmouth home, are a summer resident, or a visitor, we hope you take advantage of all that the Chamber has to offer.
Holiday